Alrighty. Howdy everyone. Happy Monday. Um, this week is middleware and using Postman. I'm gonna paste the link to the sign-in form. Just go ahead and do that if you don't mind, so I can take attendance later tonight. Um, I have like a little demo from last week that I was planning to go over, and then I had to cancel the session at the last minute. I'm very sorry about that. I did not do enough forward planning to realize I was going to have an issue. So that's my bad. I'm planning to maybe just run through the same demo if that's helpful to fill out some time today. But as I want to start with just an open forum. If there's any questions, comments, something you'd like to review in particular, feel free to bring that up now. All right. Hearing nothing, I will just jump straight into the demo in that case. So, with that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and close this for now. We'll close this, and we will go ahead and pull up this demo project. All right, so I'm gonna paste the link here. Um, this is a link to a repository where I'm hoping to put all of the demos that we do in future weeks. Uh, so we have a demo of using sockets, which we did 2 weeks ago. And then this week, I already pre-committed a little bit of starter code for what we're going to do today. All I've committed is a small little front end, so we don't have to write anything. Um, anything JavaScripty or HTML. And we'll use that and we'll build out the Express node server using this package.json as a starting point. So we're going to use Axios, which is a library that's used usually on the front end to make requests to an API server. You could use fetch for everything if you want to, but Axios is a little bit more convenient and has some extra things that people prefer. And then Express, which is the framework that we introduced last week, and we'll talk a little bit more about this week. And NodeJS, we've been using that, just auto reloads the backend. So this is what we're planning to stick with. And then we can also use Postman as a tool to test our API endpoints. We'll set up Postman to do a test of our API once we actually get that going. Normally, what you would probably do is as you're developing your backend API, you either will not have whatever front-end client is making requests to that server ready to go. Maybe it's still work in progress. Maybe it's something that you're going to do afterwards. Or, in some cases, maybe you already have your front end and it's mostly there, just, it doesn't have the specific API calls in place yet. But Postman's a really great tool that I've used quite a bit to sort of like save requests to specific API endpoints that you can run to test things out. And as you're making changes, you can rerun them and stuff like that. So you can also do anything you can do from Postman from a front end, or you can do it from your terminal just using curl. Um, you can send a curl request, which in this case, we're sending a post request with application JSON data. and with this particular JSON data to some some resource. In this case, it's a server that I'm running locally on my computer, but you could curl to Google as well. In this case, you're going to get back some HTML endpoint since this will return a front end rather than some data from your backend. So you can use curl as well. It's just harder to save specific things. I use curl a lot at work for like one-offs, and if I have things that I know I'm going to be testing out repeatedly, then usually it's better to use Postman. So we'll do a little bit of Postman TLDR, but we're going to focus on the Express server, just get a basic application up and running, test it with Postman, and then we'll add in a couple of middlewares just to prove that we can do it. Um, and the more important middlewares that do something useful, I think, are coming in future weeks, like Passport. Passport is a middleware that lets you extract away most of the logic of authenticating tokens that are sent by the client that's allow you to determine that this person is who they say they are and they have certain permissions, and if they don't have permission, you can reject the request. So that's something that's more useful than anything we're going to do today, but we'll talk about middleware at least. All right, that's a lot of rambling, but that's the plan. If there are no questions, I'm going to jump into it. If there are questions, speak now. All right. In that case, I'm going to ask that if you want to follow along, go ahead and clone this Kangaroo demos repo. Your main branch should already have this folder in it. So what you have to do is git clone with this URL. I paste it for you guys. So, oops, that was gross. All right, feel free to do that, or you can just follow along. That's also fine. All right, I'm going to open this in VS Code and we're going to get started. All right, so I have my package.json. I have some dependencies, but I don't actually have those dependencies yet in a node modules folder. I haven't downloaded them. So we're going to go ahead and npm install them. Just get ready to go. And you'll notice that our start script is running something called nodemon app.js. We now have nodemon. We do not have an app.js. So let's go ahead and create that. We'll just console.log hello for now, just to make sure it works. And if we npm start, it'll print us out hello. And it exits because it hasn't done anything else super useful. Cool, so we got that working. Let's do the more interesting stuff here. So we are going to start by importing our Express library. So I'm going to call this Express. This is a default export from this module. This is a bunch of TypeScript, so this is not super helpful. But we can name this whatever we want because it's a default export. So we're going to call it Express. And we're going to call this. This is a function, a top-level function exported by the module that creates an Express application. So what is Express? It's just like a lightweight framework that helps take away a lot of the boilerplate involved with setting up an HTTP server. So in previous lessons, we just used the HTTP package provided by Node, and there's a create server function. And then we have our server, and we say server.on some event or message. Then we have our request and our reply or our response. And we do stuff with our requests, and we had like a bunch of different if statements to determine like where is this request sent to, and if so, call a specific function. or, is the request data valid, and you had to manually parse that out. Express will do all that for you, and all you have to do is declare what are the specific routes to which a request can be sent. If it's not valid, Express will reject it for you automatically without having you have to catch that. And we can also tell Express what kind of data we're expecting, and it'll parse that automatically. So we don't have to do that either, which is pretty great. So we're going to create our Express application. And then I believe we still have to create our server. Import creates HTTP create server. So we can create our server, and we have a request listener. We have this app Express. Trying to remember what the syntax is here. I want to say that this is what we have to do. And then app.listen. We specify what port we're going to listen on. Okay, we're going to listen from our server instead. Server.listen. We'll put it on port 3000 somewhat arbitrarily. And then we have our callback that executes once our server starts up. So we're going to console.log server is running on HTTP localhost 3000. And now if I go to this URL, our server is running. There is no default route. There is no route with no path defined, and so it's not going to do anything. But we could change that pretty easily. We could create a get route on our Express application and say, if I get at just the default path, then my request and my response, which is the parameters of every single API endpoint, will say res.status 200.send. And we'll just send a string that says, welcome to the server. So now if I go to that route, I get back a string, welcome to this server. So what do we have here? We have a declaration of a route and a specific method for that route. A get means that I'm getting something from the server. A post means I am submitting new data for the server to create if it doesn't already have it. There's also things like a put request, which I believe will replace something that already exists or create it if it doesn't exist. There's like a semantic difference between put and post. There's a patch request, which says this thing should already exist on the server. I just want to update it in a specific way. There's a delete, which says this object exists on the server and you should delete that object for me. The method is what you are saying this route is supposed to accomplish. So if I have get and I have like some piece of data here, and my data is foobar. Well, maybe I want to get whatever this data is. So I'm going to JSON.par or stringify my data and send it back. This is just some object that exists. In that case, my data that I get back is this array foobar in a JSON string. I can actually remove this stringify. I think it will just send the array back. Yeah. So now I just get my whole list here with one item rather than a string. All right. So we have our Express server right now. It doesn't do anything super exciting. We're going to make a small little ice cream shop, which is what this front end does. But before we do that, let's make sure that we can actually get to our front end so we can test whether our ice cream shop is going to work or not. The way that we want to do this instead of this default route here, um, we're going to say app.use. So use in Express indicates that we have a middleware that we want to use. I forget what the syntax is here. Um, let me really quick cheat and double check. There's a specific method that we need to import, I think. Here it is, express.static. So let's try this. We'll make this lowercase. All right, so static is a built-in middleware that serves static files and is based on serve static. I don't even know what serve static is. Presumably that's some older technology or standard perhaps. But this middleware allows us to serve static files, meaning files that are like on your server somewhere. They are hard coded, they're existing, and they're not going to change is the most important thing. So we're not serving JavaScript necessarily, but we can if we want to. In this case, we're going to serve HTML and CSS. Those are predefined files. We put them in a public folder indicating that these are resources that it is okay if people access them from our server. They are public. Um, so if I want to serve static, what I can do is I can serve my public folder at this base route here. And so now if someone goes to my server and they go to localhost 3000 slash index.html, well, now they are on that HTML page that we have declared in our public folder, and we are serving everything in that public folder. Similarly, they could actually go to our normalize.css here, and this is maybe not ideal that they can access our CSS files directly. But in this case, we're just going to serve them this HTML page and allow them to interact with our front end. And so our HTML page, if we look in here, um, is a small quantity of HTML that I wrote over the weekend. All it is a header and a list of what ice cream flavors our server has in stock. And then down here, we have a small little form that lets us say, I want to buy one of those flavors and a certain number of scoops. Right now, none of this works because if I go into my debugger and I look at the network page, when I try and check my stock, is going to say, I sent a GET request to my local domain, localhost 3000, but it was a 404 because that route doesn't exist. So we're going to have to create that before this thing over here will actually work. And here is some JavaScript that I wrote that actually does this. We've added a button that calls this get stock function and it makes a get request to this API. We're going to ignore this header for now. This is something that we could use for our middleware. And then it's going to take the response and put it into a list and set that content. And then down here, our form, we add a listener for when the form is submitted. We're going to cancel the page refreshing because we don't want that. Instead, we're going to send that thing we want to buy. It's a post request, and then I'm modifying contents on the server. Maybe you could make this a patch request. That might be semantically correct. There's probably arguments for it regardless. And then we're going to take the response if it works, and we're going to update the stock, which will have changed, and otherwise we're going to show an error. And this is our error down here. So that's our front end. We're not going to write that. Sorry, written for us. Instead, we're going to jump into the fun stuff, which is making this Express server. So first things first, we need to actually declare our routes. and we're going to declare a controller. This controller is where we're going to declare the actual logic that controls a specific resource on our server. In this case, it's ice cream. So in here, we're going to create some ice cream flavors in a list. And we're just going to pre-populate this since we don't have anything on our form to add new flavors. I think that's just going to take too long, so I left that out. So let's say our flavor is vanilla. And how many scoops do we have? We have 5 scoops of vanilla left. And we also have chocolate. And how many scoops do we have? Maybe we only have 3 scoops of chocolate. And our last flavor is going to be strawberry. Here we only have 8 scoops left because strawberry is unpopular. All right, so this is our data. In a real environment, this data is going to exist like on a database somewhere where it's actually persistent when I restart my server. But we're just going to hard code it for now, just to remove some complexity. And let's write what we can actually do with these flavors. So we can get stock, which is going to return all the flavors that we have. So let's return our flavors. And we have our function by flavor or by ice cream. And this, let's say, takes in a flavor and a number of scoops. And what are we going to do here? We're going to look through the list of flavors. And we're going to say item is equal to flavors of I. So this just loops through every item from 0 up until, but not including the length. So this will go 0, 1, 2. And we're going to get that item. And if item dot flavor is equal to the incoming flavor, actually, we're going to invert this. We're going to say if the flavor is not the same, then we're going to skip and look at the next flavor because we don't need to consider it. If someone's trying to buy vanilla, we don't need to consider chocolate or strawberry. And so now we know that we do actually have the right flavor, and we're going to say if item dot scoops is less than the number of scoops requested, then we're going to return we'll return an object that says error. No, we're going to just return an error string here. And we'll say wanted to buy scoops, but only item dot scoops in stock. So they want to buy a certain number of scoops, but those don't exist. And otherwise, we're going to return an empty string to indicate that it was successful. And we'll take item dot scoops and subtract away the amount that someone bought. And if we loop through this and we don't find the flavor they're interested in, maybe they submit a request for mint chocolate chip and we don't have that. Well, eventually we'll get to the end of this loop. Every single time it will have been the wrong flavor, and so we don't ever get to execute this stuff over here. And so we need a default case here. And we're going to say flavor not found in stock. Is not in stock, maybe. All right, so this is basically our whole shop. This is all that we're going to support right now. And now let's create our actual API. So we can just declare our API routes directly in our folder here. We can say we have a get route, we have a post route, we have a delete route, so on and so forth. But this is very quickly going to be difficult to follow, and it's going to get very bloated very fast as you add more objects and more complexity into your application. And so typically what we want to do instead is we want to declare routes. And these routers allow us to separate our related routes for a single object into different places. So any routes that rely on the ice cream are going to be declared together. And separately, we can have a router that handles all of our like cookie stock if we had other types of objects as well. Or if we had users, we have a bunch of routes related to users. Maybe we want people to be able to create an account or delete their account. We probably want to separate those out as well so that they're not all in one place. So we're going to declare some routes in here. We're going to just, for now, oops, we're not writing Go. I do that at work, but I don't do that here. We're just going to use one router for now since we only have one object, but we can make this more complicated if we want to in the future. And so what we're going to do is we are going to import our router. And this is a function. We can pass options to it if we want to. And then we're going to export our router as the default thing. So what can we do with this? What is this router? I don't know why I thought this was going to be helpful, but it just takes me into the TypeScript definitions. Let's jump into the documentation instead. I think that'll be more helpful. Cool. So we have our app here, and these routes exist. Express.router. All right, this is what we want. So it's creating a router instance, which is another middleware, just to be clear. And this allows us to sort of separate out our different routes about specific objects into individual routers. So we create a router object using this function, and then we declare on this router, we can either declare a middleware that only runs for the routes that exist on this router, in this case, these GET requests. Or more importantly, in our case, we are going to actually declare the specific API routes that we support for ice cream using our API. And then we're going to export that router and allow people to use it. Again, it's a middleware, so we want to use that use function and say, if I go to /birds, that should only handle the routes declared by this bird router here. So let's set this up. We have our router.get, we'll say our stock. And if we get the stock, then we are going to do our, we got to export these functions or else they're not going to be accessible. Let's jump back into here. We're going to export these in an object so that they are named. And in our router, we're going to say, if we want to get the stock, then our stock is equal to get stock, which imports from this controller over here. And then once we have this stock, we're going to respond with status 200, which indicates that it was successful. I got the thing. This may feel like a completely arbitrary number, but a lot of designing backends is understanding that a lot of conventions exist. Um, and the whole point of these conventions is so that everyone's API makes logical sense when you see a status code or a specific route, what it is trying to do. So one convention is these status codes. You can technically return any status code you want, but these numbers conventionally mean a specific thing. So these 200 codes, anything in the 200s is a successful response. So if your server had an error, you should not be returning a 200. 200 just means the request succeeded. This is like the default thing that people use. If you had a post request that is creating an object on the server, then we want to return 201 instead of 200 because we created an object. Those are the main two. Sometimes people use 204 if you're actually not sending anything back to the person. So maybe they created an object, but like they don't like need anything back from the server if you're creating like a user, you probably want to give back the ID of the user you created or like a token that they're able to use. But in our case, you know, maybe sometimes you don't need to do that. In that case, you can use this 204. Um, And then by comparison, 400 error codes usually mean that the person who sent the request did something wrong. So 400 means your request had some invalid data in it and the server can't do anything with it. 401 means they did not authenticate with your server first. They didn't submit a token that's valid, something like that. 404 means they tried to access something that doesn't exist. That could be an object that doesn't exist. Maybe they tried to get user number one, but user number one isn't a real thing, something like that. And then the 500 error codes are the server did something wrong. 500 is the thing that you're going to return 99% of the time, which just says your request was fine, but some programming error on the server or some external dependency not being available means that we couldn't handle your request. And so we're going to send it back to 500, which probably means you should retry it. So a lot of information. I frequently go back to these Mozilla web docs, which I think are really, really helpful for a lot of these convention things. If I'm trying to figure out like, okay, I have this API that I want to create, what is the right thing to send back to the user? I'll probably come here and check out these just to make sure that I'm sending the right status code so that whoever's reading my documentation is going to know what is actually happening when they get this code back. In this case, for our purposes, it is not possible for there to be an error. It's just a predefined object. That object always exists. Um, so if they get the stock, we're just going to return everything to them. We're going to return a JSON object, which is our stock. And also, if someone posts to us that they want to modify the stock, then we have a request and a response. And result or error is equal to buy ice cream. And buy ice cream takes in the flavor in the scoop. So we need to take that off the request. So our request has a body. This body may or may not exist. So let's check. Does the body not exist? In which case, our response is going to be status 400. It's a bad request. They didn't give us the data that we need. And we're going to send JSON missing flavor and /or scoops. And then we're going to return to indicate that we don't want to execute anything else in our function. And now we can say our flavor and our scoops are properties of this request.body object. And if flavor is not present, then we're going to say error. Oops, that's what we're missing. We're going to return this as an object that has an error property. So here, missing flavor. And then similarly, if someone does not define scoops, they are missing the scoops, and we're going to return. Otherwise, we'll pass flavor and scoops to this buy ice cream method. And our buy ice cream method is going to return either an error string or an empty string if it's successful. So in that case, if it's successful, then error will not be equal to an empty string when something goes wrong, and we're going to say res.status 400.json error. And this syntax over here, I'm not forgetting this. This just means I have a variable and you're going to put a property on this object named error, and the contents is going to be the value of this variable. So if you just put a variable in here, then it'll add a property where the name is the name of the variable and the value is the value of the variable. Just a quick little shorthand. Otherwise, if there is no error, then we're going to return a 200 and we'll return JSON. Actually, we'll return our 204. And we'll send it with no content. 204 was the status that meant we're done. There is no body coming back to you. So in that case, it was successful. All right, I think I saw maybe a question on Zoom. Let me go check that. Is the ice cream project in Kangaroo demos? Yes, but not what we're writing right now. We're working in this Express folder, which right now just has the front end and the package.json. But I will go ahead and upload the stuff that we write tonight right after this. So it should be available by the end of the night. All right, so now we have our API. We have the stock. We have a get and a post request at /stock. We need to use this router. So we're going to app.use /ice cream. And we'll rename this to be ice cream since this is specifically our ice cream router. And so now any request that is prefixed with /ice cream will actually go to this router over here, and then it'll match the rest of the path here. So /ice cream /stock will hit this get request, /ice cream /stock. If it's post, it'll hit this instead. We can actually prove that if we want to. Let's go back into our server here. So we have our index.html. Did I actually run this server? I don't think that I did. Oops. Controllers, ice cream, route /ice cream. This should be .js, I think. And then this one also has to be .js. I don't know why it auto-imported without that .js prefix, but it's trying to import like a library that doesn't exist. All right, now it looks better. So if we go in here and we go to the base route, it goes to our front end. Since it's trying to serve that index.html. And if I go to /ice cream, we don't have a route of just /ice cream, but we do have one of /ice cream /stock. And this is going to give us back our whole stock. And we can't really simulate a post request with just this URL. We could use curl, or we could use Postman. So I'm going to use Postman here. You guys will definitely want to install this. If not for this week's assignment, then definitely just going forwards, it is a very handy tool to have. But let's say we have Postman here. Postman allows us to create specific requests and save them. And we can send those whenever we want just by hitting a button. We can attach specific data to it to test out what properties we're sending with. We can attach headers to it. We can stick some body in there if we want to. Um, this is just a really handy way of creating like a fleet of requests that you're going to test out a lot in saving those. So let's rename, or let's actually not do this. We're going to create a new collection, and we're going to say this is ice cream routes. And then inside of this, I'm going to delete this other one. We're going to create a new GET request, and we're going to send it to localhost slash ice cream slash stock. It's a GET request. We didn't pass any data to it. We didn't pass any headers yet. So all we have to do really for this one is just fill in this URL of where we want to send a request, and then hit send, and it'll give it right back to us. I have Postman installed on my computer, which means that it is able to hit servers running locally. Um, the way that I did this was using brew install Postman. For those of you on Windows, you may have to download an executable and run it, but there should still be a Windows version of this. You can also access Postman on the browser, but I've had issues with this in the past where it's not able, I think, to send a request to some server that you're running locally on your computer. Maybe you have to set something else up separately to get that to work. I think the easiest installation path is just to get it running in the desktop version or in your Mac version. Um, yeah, and so as long as I have my thing running, it'll be able to hit it. If I turn off my server and try and run it again, then it's going to tell us that it couldn't connect to that server because there is no server to connect to. So let me start that back up. And now it should be back to running. Cool. So this is a saved request. I can name it whatever I want. Get full stock. Maybe I'll have other GET requests that get specific things at different routes. So it's definitely handy to name these. We can create other ones too. In this case, I'm going to create a post request and try and hit this this second endpoint here where we're subtracting away from the stock. And so this post request is also going to the same URL, but it's a different method, which is totally fine. We can only have one request per method per URL. Otherwise, we have to change one or the other. And this one has to come with some JSON data. So we're going to select raw, and then we're going to select JSON of these options here. We could send it just blank text or like actual JavaScript files. But in this case, we're going to send it JSON, which is an object, and we wanted to send it a flavor. We'll start with mint, and then scoops of 3. And if we submit this, it should tell us that we're missing the flavor and or scoops. Why is it telling us that? Oh, you know what it is? One thing that you might run into in this assignment is that you have to also declare a middleware for parsing JSON. This is also a built-in middleware. If you don't include this, then it will not be able to parse any JSON body that you send, and your requests will be like, oh, there's no data in this request, but you're going to think, oh, I am passing data. I obviously did that. So now if I send it, now it tells us the thing we're expecting, where mint is not a flavor in stock, and so it's not valid. But if I have vanilla and I want to buy 1 scoop of vanilla, I do have that one in stock. We have 5 scoops, and so I should be able to run this 5 times successfully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then if I run it a 6th time, let's check. My stock should now say 0 for vanilla because I've gotten rid of all of those flavors. And I wanted to buy 1 scoop, but I do not have any in stock, and so it is no longer valid to do that. Cool. We just validated that our API worked using Postman. And I can save all of these requests. I can Control S to save them or hit the save button up here. And now if I close this, Postman and I come back to it later, maybe, the next day or in a couple days, I should still see all my requests in here and I can go back to this really easily. So super, super helpful tool. Highly recommend getting in there as soon as possible. There's so much customization here. We're using it for very basic purposes right now. But there's lots of cool things you can do in here. You can set headers, you can set authorization, you can use variables to extract away this URL. So if I want to replace this with a different instance of my server, maybe one that's running in the cloud somewhere, I can do that really easily rather than having to go into each of these individually and replace things. A lot of cool things you can do with Postman. Highly encourage you guys to explore. But we got 10 minutes, so I'm going to try and speed run through the rest of this demo instead. All right, I'm gonna quit the server and I'm going to restart it, which will refresh my stock. And so now if I get, we should be back to 5 scoops of it. So this is still saying 404. The URL is not found. It's because I wrote the front end and then I totally changed our API routes. And so let's go back through here and make sure that these are correct. So this is going to /API/stock. This should be /ice cream. It's sending in this authorization bearer token. This is a header that says my auth token is this thing. This is a standard format for any like JSON web token, which we'll talk about in another week. We're going to leave that even though it's not doing anything here. And so now if I restart the server, response.data.icecream is undefined. So the actual response data is now of a different format. So let's check what that format is. All right, so our format is just an array of 3 different objects, and they have a flavor and a number of scoops. So let's update this. So of response.data, each object is ice cream, and then we have flavor and scoops. Cool. So now it'll actually display our stock correctly. Let's say I went back into my post request and I sent that a couple times to buy 3 vanillas. Now, if I check my stock again, this will now say 2 because that has changed. I just bought 3 scoops. And this form also is a little bit busted because I also changed the API there. So let's fix that one too. We're posting /ice cream /stock. And our flavor and scoops are the parameters. Those should be the same. We're going to leave this header again. And now if I say I want to buy 2 scoops of vanilla and I purchase, we purchased successfully and vanilla went down to 0. If I purchase 2 scoops of chocolate, now this goes down to 1. And if I try and purchase 2 more, it fails because there was not enough stock left over. Wanted to buy 2 scoops, but only 1 exists. All right. That is the main portion of our demo. We now have a working ice cream shop. We talked about Express. We talked about Postman very briefly. Sorry, I need to do not disturb my phone for the last 5 minutes. Let's briefly talk about these middlewares and write our own middleware. So these middlewares are provided by Express. A middleware is something that's going to execute before everything else that is declared on this Express app. So this middleware is the very first thing that's going to run. After that middleware, we're going to run this express.json. So if we did not serve some static content, if they didn't try and go to our index.html, then we assume it's something actually coming to our API. And if it is a JSON request that has JSON body, then we're going to parse JSON. Requests can be of other formats too. There's like a URL encoded string. You could pass XML, which is sort of the same format as HTML, but is not like a strictly defined set of elements. like HTML, there's a body element, there's an HTML element. XML is the same format where it has tags, but it could be anything you want. Um, and in that case, we would want to use express.xml or uh, I don't know. Maybe there's no equivalent right here, but there are other ways that we can parse that other stuff. But JSON specifically, we want to parse with our application. We don't care about everything else. And after we parse the JSON body, which has to happen before we actually hit the route that handles the request, um, we're going to do that. And then we finally pass the parsed JSON to our router, which is another middleware. And this router, before it goes to this specific route and handles the request, we could declare more middleware on here if we want to. We could use router dot uh, use, and then we could declare a new piece of middleware if we want to. Um, in this case, let's declare our own middleware using a slightly different syntax. So handling a request, we only have our request object, which is all the things coming in, and our response object, which allows us to send something back out. For middleware, we have our request, we have our response, and we have a next function. So this next function means I handled this thing and I did something to it. Maybe I modified the request. In the case of this JSON middleware, it's taking the binary incoming data and parsing it into JSON objects. And then that object is what then gets passed on with the request to the next thing. So we could have any number of middleware before we actually hit our get and our post here. Um, this one is going to run after the JSON and after the static file middleware. And in this case, maybe we say if rec.headers dot authorization does not exist, or rec.headers dot authorization is not equal to, and let's create like a static token A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So if this authorization header, we're going to actually put this in a variable. We'll print it to the page. So if it is not declared or auth is not equal to bearer token, we're going to use those tick marks so that it does string interpolation. Then we will respond dot status 401 send not authenticated. And we'll change this to 1234 actually. Otherwise, if they are authenticated and they do have this token, then we will call next, which just says, okay, take this request and pass it on to the next thing, which will be this actual route here. So now, if I go back into my shop, we're going to get that error again, 401. We are unauthorized because we do not pass that bearer token. We are passing instead a bearer token of A, B, C, D, E, F, G as the header. This is what we had earlier. We're passing an authorization header. This is just a standard format with a bearer token. Let's change this token to match what our server expects, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now if I refresh the page, that will go away because now our request is passing the right token. And if I go in here, we console.log that new token, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know that this does in fact match this bearer string here, and we can not reject it and move on to the next thing, which gets the stock. All right, that was me talking really fast at you guys for an hour. I'm sorry for being low engagement. I forgot that this was going to take a long time. But I hope people got something out of this. I can stick around for a couple minutes for questions if there are any. So feel free to stick around. Otherwise, if there's no questions, make sure you fill out the sign-in form before you leave, please. I'm going to take attendance later tonight. Um, so fill that out before you go. And I will see you guys next week. All right. There's at least one question. So go ahead, intro.
I have two questions. Uh, could you open app.js file? And so here you use server. You created server for running server, but I believe we could run it using app.listen without creating. And what is the difference between them?
This is a great question. Express by itself, I don't think actually creates I want to say it doesn't create a full HTTP server. I think it's mostly just like something you stick on top of an HTTP server. I think I just pulled this from the Express documentation. Um, but yeah, I did also notice that app has a listen function, so it's quite possible that it works without, in which case feel free to do that as well. Oh, you're totally right. Yeah. I think the reason why you can do both is so like what he's saying is we can take away this HTTP create server and instead we do app.listen and we just stick everything onto the Express here. And this also works. I can go in here and I can buy 2 scoops of vanilla, and that's no problem. I think the reason why it exists that we can also create an HTTP server is if we want to use that server for other things. So something that I've done in the past is I was working on a project for my school in college, and this project was an Express server that also, in addition to being a server that had like API routes, it also used socket.io, which we talked about 2 weeks ago, where a server and a client can connect and just send messages to each other in real time. There's no high-level framework. You're just sending messages, and the client and the server have to interpret those messages to determine what to do. That is a way that we can do things at a much higher speed that need to be done a little bit more flexibly. And so the project we were working on was a game. And so what people would do is they would send requests to the server to say, I want to join or create a game. But once the game started, all of the logic of interacting with the game from all the users was done using socket.io. And socket.io also uses this HTTP server. And so what we had to do is we had to create an HTTP server and then sort of like stick Express and socket.io into the existing server. If we just use Express here, this is not by itself an HTTP server. I don't have any customization over this. Um, but if I use the one provided by HTTP, I can actually provide it with options as well. Um, at least I want to say that there's an opportunity for options. Um, maybe there's a function for it. I don't remember exactly. Um, but we have a lot more control over the specific HTTP server. So if you need an HTTP server to stick on something else, whether it be like for socket.io to mount onto the server, or if you need for your specific environment to configure the properties of the server, I don't think you can do that necessarily with Express by itself. But if you're creating something really basic like we have here, then yeah, I think we can just use app instead, and everything should still work.
So, as I understand, when we using a HTTP server, it store uh, our state between requests.
Um, no. Uh, well,
So
y
I'm
yes
talking
and
about scoops. When you buy one, so um,
Yeah, I
How,
think you know
how
what you're trying to get at. Go ahead and finish the thought though. Sorry.
so in the beginning, we have some quantity of ice cream scoops,
Yep.
and I thought that each request we have the same quantity, but but during server running, the quantity changes.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is a great question. Um, so this is a JavaScript array, which exists somewhere in the memory of my computer only as long as this application is running. So this is a piece of data that exists in the server. And as long as my server is running, this array will exist. I can modify the contents of the array. That's what we're actually doing here. We're decreasing the number of scoops, which changes this object that exists somewhere in memory. But the reason why we don't really want to do this for every application and we would want to use a database is it only exists as long as the application is running. So I just bought 4 scoops of vanilla ice cream. I'm now down to 1. If I refresh the page, my application is still running. The server is still running, so it says 1 scoop. But if I were to cancel this server and turn it off, um, which for some reason my terminal is not open. How is my terminal not open? So if I turn this server off and then I start my server back up, it's now redeclaring this variable by running this JavaScript file, which executes top to bottom and just declares these functions that are going to get exported and sticks this data into memory. And if I refresh my page, this goes back to 5 because my server restarted, the state of my application reset. So we don't really want to hard code things. I've just hard coded it for the purposes of getting through today. If I wanted something that was going to persist even when my application crashed, or I wanted to redeploy it in a new version, or I like made some changes and I want to restart my application so it picks up those changes, I would not ever want to hard code data that needs to be the same. Instead, I would put this data in a database and I would write a bunch of like database client code that's going to request to my database and make a request to update the database when my stock changes. And so I wouldn't hard code this here. This would exist inside of a database and I would just be writing functions to interact with that database. But for this purposes, this is a JavaScript variable that exists for the length of the application as long as the server is running. And I can modify that because it just exists somewhere in memory. But as soon as my application dies, the computer loses track of that memory and it frees it up so that some other process can use it if it wants to. Does that make sense?
yes, thank you so much.
Yeah. Great questions.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'll see you guys next week.